as soon as I have a day off work, it rains. Last few days while I've been in work, it's been beautiful sunshine. As soon as I'm home, this is what we have. Anyway, first things first, I suppose, is start undoing the bolts there on the top of the above the gearbox, take all the covers off. I suppose I've also got to take the starter motor off and stuff like that. Take this plate off as well. Then start undoing the prop shafts. Anyway, give you some updates when I can. Not really looking forward to this, but I can't go putting it in a garage because I don't know what's wrong with it. They might just return the Jeep back to me, say, sorry, the parts don't exist, here's your Jeep, it's bust. That's the problem with having something like this, I suppose. Oh well. Just taking a bit of video of a few points like the wiring on the starter before I start stripping things down. As you can see, the rain has let up a little bit today, so we're taking my tent down and started stripping the parts off and disconnecting the prop shaft, rear prop shaft, and loosening off a number of the bolts and so on, disconnecting the overdrive linkage, take the handbrake cable off, transmission brake cable I suppose you should call it, loosening all the bolts off and so on. So I'm going to take the starter motor off and then start removing bolts. Got a jack under the middle of the gearbox there to take the weight. May also throw some ropes around here and there and tie them up onto the chassis, some nylon rope, which I can always cut if and when I need to, just so things don't drop all of a sudden. Inside, I've taken the transmission cover off so you can see the top of the gearbox now. Yes, so there's been an oil leak which has been dripping down and running down here and under the transmission cover. Now I did have a heater sat in here, so it was hiding a little bit about how bad the oil leak was, and you see it's gone under the cover. There's the cover I've taken off on the top of the gearbox here, so you can see there's oil got everywhere. It's been dribbling down there for a while. I actually think it's a failing of the pipe. You can also see it, oil has come back along the pipe. It's either a fail in the pipe here, you see there's oil spraying out down there as well when you're driving. There's oil running down there, there's oil everywhere basically from that pipe. This pipe is pretty oily, so I need a new one of those. Yeah, so that could be what's causing at least part of the problem. fouling up, maybe clutch plate dust and oil trapped in the splines is causing the clutch to start binding and not disengaging properly intermittently. So that's my current problems. Anyway, see how I go. Okay, got all the bolts out the transmission and out the bell housing anyway. There's basically 3 of them. Now what I've done is I've just put these M10 bolts slid into the holes just to give some unexpected support. And well, support in case it's unexpected, I should say, put it that way. I've stuck this this trolley with some paving blocks on and a bit of wood for packing underneath the bell housing. Got the jack under the centre here. Props disconnected as I said before. These bolts I've got loosened off ready, so I'm going to undo those shortly. Last thing I need to do is I need to disconnect that prop there, the front prop. You can see I've got a spanner already hanging on it there. So basically disconnect the 4 nuts on the rear and I should be able to drop that away. The easy way to do that is to well, I've got freewheeling hubs on here, so basically just engage both hubs, start loosening some nuts off, then disengage one hub on one side and spin the prop over to the next nut, and then lock the hub again and undo, and just do that as it works round. Yeah, I've jacked it up off the floor just a bit, so I can spin props around and stuff like that. Yeah, it's stripping down. You can see there's a lot of oil leaks around on this thing. In time I might be able to cure them all. I've decided not to use the little trolley. The cat seems to be happier on it than me using it anyway. So I've decided to use some uni-strut, as I've used it many times, and put my chain hoist in and drop it around the box. And another point to remember is there's a small cover, dirt splash cover, which fits down inside there. If you can see the thing, bolts onto the bell housing of the gearbox, and you've got to remember to remove that, otherwise that's going to stop the gearbox coming off. On this one it didn't have a hydraulic clutch. See, this gearbox here, the new one I've bought, a spare one, that's got a hydraulic clutch and pipe on it, whereas this Jeep has been built to old spec. It's got the old-fashioned pedals assembly on it, and it's got all this linkage, see, which I've unbolted so that I can strip the gearbox away from it. So I think I've got all the plates now. Looking at it, there's another one there on the bottom. I've got to take that one off as well, otherwise it's not going to come past the flywheel. So that's a definite other job to be done. Probably should have done that one first before I started anything else, really. Anyway, I'll get that done now. There's another point worth knowing. You've also got to remove these levers for this transmission levers. So the way that's done is there's a small wire locked bolt down here. Now this wire was wrapped round through there and back round so that it couldn't come undone, that bolt. So basically you cut the wire on the bolt and then you back it off several turns, and then this here should twist out with a pair of pliers on it and pull straight out. Then your levers will just drift out through the tops there. They're just, see, they're just free floating in at this end. They're not linked. There's no pin in them. So yeah, that's that bit. So in order to do that, you've basically got to get at it down through there, or as you see, you can't move the gearbox far enough back to get it off the engine and so on. So they've got to be removed. I'm still trying to do it leaving the gear stick on, but we'll see. I might have to take that off as well. That's not that hard to remove. 3 bolts on the top, and then there should be one there at the front there that you can take off. But at the moment I'm going to see if I can leave the stick on and just pull it back and drop it. Okay, there's the gearbox off. Now, there's my thrust bearing. Now what do we see that's wrong in here? Well, I see a lot of oil inside the bell housing, but I've seen that many times before, that amount of oil, and that really caused significant problems. The actual clutch cover, that looks fairly free of oil. You can see inside the inside there it looks fairly dry. The splines are not oily. In fact, if anything, they're a little touch rusty. You can see that there. It could be a little bit of rust has been causing the snagging. Not sure. Anyway, there's a close-up again on the thrust bearing. What I'll do is I'll take a measurement of this shaft. If not right now, I'll do it later on the other gearbox. There's no rush on it, on things. Now, I'm not seeing anything particularly wrong straight away with the clutch plate here, with the clutch cover. So what could be its problem? Look at that. That's not sliding back. The thrust bearing. The thrust bearing is seizing up. Look at that. It's not sliding back on the shaft. So the question is, do I strip this down and replace the clutch cover and so on. I can't really replace the friction disc because I haven't got one. I could strip it down and check it out. That's a little sticky there, but the springs on there should make up for any of that. So I think I'll strip this down and have a look at how everything looks inside. Okay, here are the two clutch assemblies. This is the Land Rover Series 2 A2 clutch disc or clutch plate. Well, we'll call it clutch disc and clutch cover, pressure plate, if you want to call it that. Now you can see straight away there's a massive difference between the centre holes in that splined, you know, the splined holes. If I quickly get a right, there's 10 splines on these shafts. That looks to me like 24 millimeters between spline 10 and 5. Yeah. We could call it 23.5. I've not got a better measuring implement than this, I'm sorry. What I really need to do is have a vernier and measure across on the axle and sorry, on the drive shaft, the spline drive shaft in the gearbox, so we can actually get a measurement of what that is. But I could say 23.5 on here. I have to look at it really close. I'm a little bit far away. This is the Series 2 Land Rover, and that is a massive difference. You're talking 28 millimeters there, so there's a massive difference in that. Now if we measure the actual smallest point across these splines, we're looking at there about 22.5. Yeah, 22.5. I'll go with that. As you can see, the 5 millimeter point there, up to 25, and it's exactly halfway. 22.5. Yeah, so anyway, there's no point in really dwelling on this one because it's way off the mark. You can possibly see that in there. You can see how much difference there is. Yeah, anyway, yeah, across the splines in there, it's hard to measure that because there's this dip in it So what I'll do, oh, it's not much better on this side. You're talking 18mm there, I would say. 18mm. Now I'm suspecting this is the same as the 9¼ inch clutch plate, clutch disc on a M38 A1, and some of the CJs. I think it was a CJ5 something. I'll put some details on top of the video. Yeah, so it's still got a bit of life in this clutch, but personally, after all the trouble I've gone to, I'd rather have it realigned before putting it back in. It's just false economy on time. All the time it's taken preparing this to strip it down, to find this and then find that that looks alright. Now in terms of what's wrong in here, well, you can see there's a hell of a lot of muck built up inside the clutch cover. See, there's a hell of a lot of dust, and if you ask me, that's probably what the problem is. If you look at the flywheel, there's also a hell of a lot of dust built up on the flywheel. So I think it's just crud fouling it all up and stopping it releasing properly. When this slides down, when the thrust bearing pushes on these 3 points here and pushes it in this way, this plate retracts backwards. I've just noticed something wrong in there. This little piece of metal here seems to have sheared off the spring. Now, seriously, I don't know whether that could have really caused a problem. I don't think it could have done. I think I'm worried about nothing there. Anyway, I'll get some pliers and I'll pull that out. Appears to be a piece of spring which is being inside there. Now that spring appears to be loose now with that missing. It's like it's fractured. Anyway, this is perhaps just Indian machining. Perhaps it's nothing to worry about. Chuck it in the box. Yeah, something I was toying around with. Is doing some slight modifications, and you can see this is 23.25 if you want to be really accurate. Now we'll probably find it's 9¼ inches. Well, they call it 9¼ but in reality it's a little bit under 9¼ but not very far off. Yeah. just, you see there, it's just under the second eighth mark. 7:30 seconds or something like that. As I say, we'll call it 23.2mm disc, and if you compare that with the Land Rover one, it's basically the same. All that's different is your centres. 23 point near as damn it 2mm. So what someone suggested is changing the centres on these two clutches, swapping them out. I wonder how possible that is to be done. Anyway, I'm suspecting that it could be a few contributing things. The amount of crud that's built up inside this clutch cover, rusting in the splines. So I'm going to just try this disc on and see how smooth it goes on the spline shaft. You know, it's not bad. I think a little bit of lubrication on there would have helped though. Maybe I should send this off for some reconditioning. Okay, there is an answer here. I've taken the thrust bearing off, or release bearing, depending on what you like to call it. That's it there. I'll take a couple of measurements of it. The internal hole in this in millimeters appears to be 32, I think. No, we'll call it 31 millimeters is the internal borehole. Externally, the bearing is 71 millimeters. So that was 31 internal by 71. The height of the bearing is 50, I think we'd call that 55. 54 or 55 millimeters. Either way, I don't suppose it's going to matter too much. Right, those lugs, measurement across those lugs is 75 millimeters. You can see maybe there's been a bit of wear there, or maybe they're supposed to look like that. I'll probably be putting a little bit of copper slip grease on these before I reassemble it.
if I put this bearing back in. Don't know. And there's that little spring on the side which pulls it back. So I'm going to be putting a little bit of lubrication on the drive shaft in the gearbox before I put this all back together. Now, these clutch plates, if you do have a Land Rover Series 2A, 2 or whatever it was, clutch disc, and you got your original one, I've done a measurement on the rivets. If you measure on the outer edge of these rivets there, they appear to be, I think it's 23.5 millimeters between the edges, which will be the same as between centers. Sorry, on this one, between the ones between the two gaps, you know, between the two plates, they are 23.5, but the ones there are about a millimeter less. They're about 22.5, and that is the same here. There they are 23.5, and they are 22.5. So if you take all these rivets, these outer rivets out, which happen to be probably brass ones on this, or there might be, now actually they're steel, black steel there. If you took all these rivets out around the edge and took all the rivets off on the Land Rover one, you could you could swap the two centres over and put new rivets in. Unfortunately, I don't really fancy trying to do that. You're certainly not going to use pop rivets, aluminium or steel pop rivets. It's got to be done correctly with a proper riveting tool. You know, I could potentially have a go at it, but I haven't really got the rivets, so I'd have to order rivets for it, and yeah, it's just I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of lubrication on this thing, on the splines, and reassemble it, but with the new clutch cover, the Land Rover Series 2 clutch cover, and just lube things up a little bit and hope things don't stick. So that's my next step. Start putting it all back together. Okay, I've started getting this all back together now. What I did in the end was I've put the original clutch disc back in, but with the Series 2 2A clutch cover on it. Land Rover Series 2 2A clutch cover over. Now I've got a few things to go putting back, all these plates, little covers and stuff. I'm hoping it's all going to turn over when it's and operate properly when I've put it all back together. Various linkages and covers all to be put back. Now one problem I was having while I was assembling this was getting the gearbox back on. I did have to get a friend to come and assist me because I needed someone below messing around operating this jack while I was also above checking for alignments and things like that.
Had some problems locating the centre point of the gearbox, you know, is it the spigot into the bearing on the flywheel. So I'm talking about locating the centre of that last 3/4 or 1 inch. That had popped out of alignment as I was no, well, not that had popped out. What I should say is the clutch disc had popped out of alignment inside the clutch cover. Now, I think the reason it had gone out of alignment is not that it wasn't in alignment in the first place, because I made this tool here to slide through the centre of the clutch disc and push this part here into the centre of the flywheel, into the centre bearing. Now, so I did line it all up as I was putting the clutch cover on. Now, I think the problem is that due to the fact that you're trying to pull this gearbox up, and you're pulling it up in a position where the likes of this point here is back here, it's out of alignment with the engine, so you can't really present it all in a straight line. So the answer would be to loosen off the engine mountings and put the engine on a bit of a slope so that it's pointing downwards towards its tail. If you look down inside there, that would be where the engine mountings would be. One on this side, and of course one down the other side down there. You can see there's a bolt on each side, one there, one there. So if you loosen them off, or potentially if you took one of these out, the engine would probably swivel over slightly. It may present a slight problem to your exhaust mountings, putting a bit of a stress on them. As I say, you'd have to try and get around that in the best way you could, but that would help you lining the gearbox up straight with the engine before trying to push it home. So it was a bit of a problem. What I effectively did to assist me while doing this was I made the likes of, you can see this has had a bit of a pressure on it there. I made the likes of 2 rods like this, and if you look under here, you've got 1 bolt here on this side, and you've got 1 bolt on this side, which are they come off with 19mm socket, yeah, and they are a metric thread. They are I had to make my own extension bolt for doing this. Actually, I'll show you in a moment. But basically, these rods are M10 and they fit all the way through. So what I did was I put a nylock on one end and I slid that through from that way, and then I just put a M10 nut on here and spun it down the thread and used this as a guide while I lined the gearbox up. But as I say, it was awkward to line the gearbox up straight due to not having the correct angle to present it to the engine. Anyway, I've managed to get around that problem. The last little problem we had was, as I say, the spigot in the centre of the gearbox, the shaft, lining that shaft up with the central bearing, because by the time I'd put a bit of a lean on the gearbox and not presenting it straight to the engine, it pulled the clutch disc slightly out of alignment. So the way around this was, as we closed the gap up between the gearbox and the engine, I put a spanner on the crankshaft down there, on the crankshaft pulley on the nut down there, and we rotated that over slowly several times as the gearbox was pulled in towards the engine, and that centered it, recentered the clutch disc, and it all popped back into position. It was a slow process, but it worked. You can see as you get closer, this area here then pulls up and clears, but when it's a few inches out, you cannot get this straight with the engine. See? So that presents a bit of a problem. Anyway, hopefully I will get this all back together today and have it running. Hopefully it'll be better than it was originally. I think its problems were a couple of fold. Something to do potentially with the thrust bearing not sliding very nicely. If you look at this one has a lot more tension on it. In fact, I can hardly pull that one. Yeah, that one's got two springs, like a coil spring on each side of it. See that? That's a slightly different layout. It may be the same thrust bearing, but I'm not sure. I don't recognise my one having two holes on it. You see, there's a hole here for that spring to locate on each side of the two lugs on the back of the bearing. So yeah, it could be mine is for a cable operated clutch, and that one is for hydraulic. Yeah, so there was that little issue that the thrust bearing wasn't running very smoothly, wasn't releasing very nice. The spring wasn't pulling itself back very well. Also, there was a lot of dust in the clutch cover. Yeah, so there was that. Plus, there was actually a third small problem. There was a piece of spring had broken in one of the springs on the clutch disc, and it was protruding slightly. Possibly it might have rubbed against the clutch cover in some sort of way, and that might have caused it to keep spinning over and not release. So hopefully I've got around those problems now. Anyway, I'll get all this back together. Got to get that starter motor bolted back up before I can do much in the way of testing it. Yeah, one other point I forgot to mention was, remember me saying I actually had to cut a bolt and thread? Well, this is the piece I made. I made a bolt which was longer than that top bolt. It's basically the gearbox is held on by three. It's a 19mm head, but a M12 times 1.5 thread is cut in it. It's not an imperial threaded vehicle, it's metric. being 1994. So it's an unusual vehicle, the Mahindra. It's got lots of aspects which are very much old American in design, some bits of it which are slightly British in design in terms of maybe the clutch cover, and then it's got metric bolts. So some would say it's a bit of a mongrel, others would say it's a bit of a hybrid, depending on how you want to look at it. Okay. Well, it's all back together. Don't know why that brake fluid warning light keeps staying on. Have to look into that. I've disconnected the oil pipe to the oil pressure gauge and stuck a bolt down it temporarily to block it off. Gear change wise, no problems. I can run through the gears in neutral, no problem. Clutch up, clutch down, all working. The other thing to note, the clutch pedal is also a hell of a lot lighter than it was. Still got to do the overdrive modification, so I've still got the bungee cord on there at the moment. But it's getting there, it's improving. I'll take her for a little run up and down the road, see how she behaves.